The fourth Sunday of Advent. I don't know about you, but what I remember of Advent as a child was counting down the days on the calendar, talking about Christmas morning constantly, and going to bed early on Christmas Eve, or at least trying to. It was all about waiting, and then even more waiting for Christmas to arrive. And that waiting was a full excitement, hope, and expectation. But here's the thing. The waiting was not the point. When Christmas morning finally arrived, kids, much like I did when I was young, didn't just sit in bed saying, well, I think I'll sit here for a few more hours and keep waiting. No, instead, we jumped out of bed, we ran to the tree, and we opened our presents with great joy. The waiting that we did so naturally led to action. And that's exactly where the church brings us today. Advent has been our time of waiting, of longing for Christ to come. But now, as we stand on the threshold of Christmas, God invites us to do what children naturally do on Christmas morning. He asks us to rise, to receive, and to respond. Because the coming of Christ is not something that we stand by and watch, it is something that we act upon. Throughout Advent, we have been a people of expectation. We have waited, we have watched, and we have listened for God's promise. But today, on this final Sunday of Advent, the gospel tells us something important. Waiting is not the end of faith. Obedience is. St. Joseph stands before us as a man who expected one future but received another. He had plans. He had a vision of how his life would unfold. And then God interrupted those plans. Not with an explanation, but with the call to trust. Joseph's holiness is not found in words, but it's found in action. The action that he took when the Lord asked him to. When Joseph awoke, he did as the angel of the Lord had commanded him. This is the turning point of Advent. Expectation gives way to our action. Joseph teaches us that doing God's will often means setting aside our own will. He does not fully understand what God is doing. He does not demand clarity or demand control. He simply chooses obedience. And that obedience makes the nativity possible. Think about it. Without Joseph's yes, Mary has no home which to give birth. Jesus has no legal place in the house of David. And our Savior would enter the world without human protection. The manger is not just the result of Bethlehem's crowded inns. It is the fruit of a man who surrendered his will to God's plans. When we look at the nativity, we often focus on what God gives us. He gives us a child, a Savior, Emmanuel, God with us. But today's gospel reminds us that God also waits for our cooperation. God chooses to enter the world through a woman who says, let it be done to me, and through a man who rises from his sleep and acts. The straw, the wood, the silence in the stable, none of it is accidental. It is repaired by obedience. As we stand on the edge of Christmas, the gospel asks us a simple but demanding question. What is God asking me to do? Not just to believe, not just to have faith, but what is he asking me to do? What is he asking me to act upon? Advent expectation becomes Christmas joy only when we forgive instead of holding on. Trust instead of trying to control. Act instead of dragging our feet, delaying what God has asked of us. Like Joseph, we may not be able to ask to understand everything, only to make room in our hearts as Joseph did. The nativity happens because Joseph makes space. He makes space in his home for Mary and God's son. He makes space in his future. He made space within his heart. And that is how Christ still comes to the world today, waiting for us to do the same. Not when everything is clear, not when our plans go as expected or are fully intact, but when we are willing to set aside our own will and say with our lives, let it be done according to your will, Lord.